Was it as crazy for Nebraska football on early National Signing Day, or did things go pretty much to script and to plan, Bryan?
I think it was pretty much the way that we expected it to be. I mean, nevertheless, I mean, Nebraska did get a pleasant surprise, or stuff that we had kind of predicted with Cortez Mills flipping on National Signing Day, which was good news for Nebraska. I mean, they had put in a lot of time and a lot of effort to continue to recruit Cortez even after he committed to Oklahoma way back in April. So to get this payday, basically 7.5 months later, it was pretty huge. But he's very tightly connected to Dawson Merritt, to Dylan Raiola, to TJ Lateef, Ja'Cory Barney, all the guys basically in the 2024 class that were from South Florida. He's connected to them. And now all of a sudden, Phil Simpson is rumored to be coming back to Nebraska too. And Phil Simpson was actually his high school head coach back in the day, 3 years ago. So that's a pretty big deal as well. So I think the Cortez Mills flip in the end, I think it's I think there's two things we can kind of take away. Number one, through all of the distractions, through all the rumors, all the stuff happening negatively, Nebraska didn't lose anybody. Nebraska didn't lose anybody down that stretch up to signing day. They got Jeremiah Jones. They got Malcolm Simpson. There were a ton of guys that were getting a late charge, from other schools, in particular like Dawson Merritt. He was getting contacted by everybody. Getting all those guys in, it was huge. But then obviously I think the flipping stuff went really in Nebraska's favor. If you think about the top guys in this class, the 3 of the top 4 guys were all flips. You look at Dawson Merritt, Cortez Mills, Isaiah Mosey, all flips. And then you start getting kind of down there again. There's some other ones like Juju Marks. He was a flip guy from Kansas. So I think the flips really went well for Nebraska. I love what they did in Kansas City. And it's going to be very interesting to see, obviously, how they kind of build onto that in 2026.
A couple of those guys that you mentioned right there, Dawson Merritt and Malcolm Simpson specifically, we know that Nebraska has lost quite a bit on the defensive line to the transfer portal. Jamari Butler out, Prince William Monmielen at the jack spot out, Vincent Jackson out as well, and then just today, Keona Davis. Are Simpson and Merritt guys you think can come in and play from day one, or those guys that you think would be best served by a redshirt and then breaking onto the field in their redshirt freshman years?
Well, I mean, it's really tough to talk about like what the redshirt year even looks like anymore. I mean, the way that the portal is kind of reshaping everything. I mean, it almost seems like red shirts are basically null and void because you got to start counting towards a 105, which means you have to have some level of productivity or looking like you're going to be productive in the next year, as opposed to can't get any good film, didn't have any good reps, can't really sell to either the school that I am at currently or any other school in the country that I'm worthy of a shot, or a spot in the 105. So I kind of think that the redshirt stuff is kind of over with. But that being said, you bring up 2 really interesting dudes, and I'll tell you what, Dawson Merritt is hurt. He's got a shoulder injury. Now, he's going to miss some time coming in, but he's not going to be completely on the shelf. It was just a partially torn labrum. A lot of times they just clean that up, but sometimes it does tear enough to where they do anchors. So I've had a couple of shoulder injuries myself. My son's ready to get one of him, also. So I'm pretty familiar with all that stuff. But, yeah, he's going to be, laid up until April, March, something like that. And then Malcolm Simpson, he's a basketball guy. So he's playing basketball for Hitchcock. He won't be in Nebraska until June. So I don't know what, like you take him and Pedchok, you take Simpson, Pedchok, and Terry, and I'd say you had a very solid defensive line class. Problem is all 3 of them don't get there until June. So you just, you've got to either hope that one or more are ready to go because the names you listed off, the Robinson out, Butler out, Hutmacher out, you're looking for some help up front, and obviously you mentioned Keona here a second ago. So there's a lot of places potentially that those guys could find a way to work themselves into a rotation, and it's just going to be a matter of how ready they are when they walk into Lincoln in June.
Another position on defense that I think there's potentially some opportunity for a couple of in-state guys Is it linebacker Christian Jones, the high school Butkus winner, and Pierce Mooberry out of Millard North? Do you see rotational snaps for those guys maybe?
I definitely do. I mean, I think Christian Jones, what an honor, first of all. I mean, if Nebraska fans went back through and saw some of the other names that were being considered, for that award, you'd realize those guys, took visits to Nebraska. Nebraska was also very high on them as well. So huge honor for Christian. Christian, is a guy that I could see playing that jack spot. We were talking about Prince Will, just a second ago, kind of leaving that opening there, that void. I think Christian's also a guy that I don't really see like a need to kind of fence him in too much. I know inside linebacker is a bit of a stretch. He's never played it before. It's a little different, considering the defense that they're playing there in Lincoln. So it's a possibility, I think, that you could probably go ahead and do it. And I think you can walk him up. I think you can do all sorts of different things with him. I think he's a very versatile guy. But Mooberry has got the range. I mean, Mooberry is a guy that also was getting looks to play, tight end in D1. So that he can move. He's a little bit longer. So 6'2"-ish, is Jones to 6'4"-ish with Mooberry. A little lighter, kind of, I don't want to say like Sean Fisher-esque, kind of longer that way. But I think that range will help him out and that length will help him out, like with dropping off into space and taking up a little bit more room. So that's definitely something that Nebraska is going to need. It's just going to depend on how, all those guys are early enrollers. So those guys right there will get to Lincoln, here in the next 2 weeks or so, probably be enrolled into some practices before they take off to New York. At least get a chance to kind of soak it up a little bit, and then come back and hit the ground running in January.
How common is it for these early enrollees to be taken on a team's bowl trip?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, Nebraska hasn't had an opportunity in a while.
Right.
But, I mean, and talking to Dawson Merritt, because, the Alabama commitment, the former Alabama commitment, they had conversations, already going with their commits. Like, hey, yeah, as soon as you guys can get here, basically you're rolling right into bowl prep and, you'll be out there doing these things. You're going to have a chance to do all these practices. You can get here as soon as like December 7th. And I'm like, whoa, like, how is that happening in the first place? A lot of these guys have school like through the 20th. So, yeah, a little bit different world, I think, for some, but I think what's going on there a little bit is like the later the bowl, the better, because you have these high schools that are not going to wrap up and the seniors, are not getting like basically the 2 weeks off before the rest of the school does, like you typically get in the May term. But this year now, it's like you show up, you get an opportunity to kind of get folded in. I think with the portal guys kind of moving out, you have to kind of create room. You can't just blindly grab everyone and say you're all traveling. It has to be like, there's a tit for tat kind of thing. Well, he's not going because he's in the portal. He's not going because he's injured. Then we can grab this many guys. Well, I think they have 13 early enrollers, and there's still some questions around, I think some of them, about when technically, they could really be available, because transcripts have to transfer and they have to be approved. And there's really no protocol in place for anybody to get their transcript looked at sooner than somebody else. There's really nothing on here that says, hey, this guy is a Nebraska football commitment, therefore he kind of bubbles up to the top. So that part there is going to be an interesting process to watch. But I think Nebraska is figuring this out a little bit as they go.
Bryan, one last thing before we let you go, man. Thanks for joining us as always. And
buddy.
I'll be down there. I got to get away. Here's the thing, B. What are you hearing out there when you're talking about now you're having to get these numbers shrunk significantly, and you're talking about not only transfer portal, new additions from high school. What is the conversation that you're having with teams or with programs or with coaches on how to handle this part of just how crazy it's been just over the last 3 years with NIL and with changes and adjustments and CFP and all these different things that are happening now, because there's a timetable on that too. where you need to have discussions with the guys that are on your roster so that they can do what they need to do. Like, how crazy is this system that you're hearing about right now, as far as the shrinking of the numbers that the team need to have?
Well, I had 2025 commits, guys that had just signed on Wednesday, concerned that they may or may not have spots in the 105. I mean, they just didn't understand it. I mean, there is just, it's such a new era of where we are at with college football. I don't like it. I don't like it personally. I don't think anything, however, is really going to change to see, you know, like I think the NCAA now is all about, you know, bringing as much money in with this process, as opposed to, you know, some of this stuff now, the greed that kind of is associated to it. You know, I think that some guys can kind of take a look at some of these guys that'll be declaring for the portal, and you'll have like a Cade Proctor type of scenario that left Alabama, goes to Iowa for a semester, and then leaves after a semester, and basically, you know, getting some sort of a check, you know, and then going right back to where he was at. I mean, there has to be some reeled in transfer rules, number one. Number two, I think that there has to be another conversation around, if you're not a 5-star or a 4-star guy and you get an offer from a D1 school, you better snap it up, because those things are going to be far and few between, I think, moving forward. Think about the trickle down effect here too, guys, just really quick. You have, you know, so you take 30 some odd players, right, that are going to get trimmed off of Nebraska's roster. Let's say that it's 120 other schools around the country trimming the same number of players from that roster. What does that do to players at the FCS level? What does that do for players at the Division II level and beyond? I mean, what about the guys at that level that were trying to be a Samari Toure kind of guy? They're trying to move up from FCS to Division I. I mean, what about the guys that are going to be at Division I level thinking, yeah, I can just slide across to another school here and be no problem. Now all of a sudden they're wondering in mid-January whether or not they're going to get another opportunity. So I think that there's a lot of cautious tales that people are going to have after this is all said and done, Strick, where people will have to like use them as examples to point to, you got to consider what happened to so-and-so and what happened to so-and-so. I mean, when you have representation going around the schools and personally coming towards the players to let them know about the interest, the bags of money that are there. I mean, Dylan Raiola is getting that too. I mean, what's really happening is up to this portal thing here is that people aren't really necessarily walking through or declaring for the portal, but they're essentially, everybody is available, you know, and can listen to what the opportunities might be. And then if they decide that's good enough for them, then they can go ahead and push the button. That's outrageous. That is absolutely outrageous. This no contractual, no love obligation, no honor among thieves kind of thing really is killing it for me this year.
Two quick ones and then a big picture one. Number one, how close was Nebraska to losing Jeremiah Jones, to your knowledge?
I think it was a fair amount. I mean, it didn't help that Nebraska had finally slid him over to the offensive side of the football, and then the rumors started to come out about Garrett McGuire, you know, no longer, you know, being at Nebraska. That did not help. And I mean, it didn't help either that he had just reaffirmed his commitment, just revisited for the Wisconsin game, had a great experience, you know, really got a chance to sit down with Garrett, and then all of a sudden Garrett's gone. I think that was tough. I mean, I think really, really tough. Plus the pressure that Missouri was giving, as well as the bag that they can throw around, it was considerable. It was disruptive. It was disruptive to his process.
Is there a player that Husker fans maybe aren't talking enough about in the 25 recruiting class you think can have an impact for the Huskers in a couple of years?
No, buddy, I love Cade Pedshock. I'm a defensive lineman, so there's my bias. I'll tell you right now, there is some Grant Wistrom in this kid. I'm telling you right now. Love his motor. Absolutely love his motor. He actually plays offensive tackle, and he's the guy, even though being recruited as a defensive lineman, he's the one I tell my freshman son, who's also an offensive tackle, I said, go watch Pedshock. That guy can play ball. He has got an absolute motor. He has no stop in him, and that's what I really remember about Grant. is just him flying off the edge, and Pedshok will be able to do that for the Huskers too. So that's a guy, just regardless of him not being able to get there in June, he figures into Nebraska's plan next year, in my opinion.
Then, according to On3, who you write for Husker Online, of course, part of the On3 network, Nebraska's 2025 class ranks 6th in the Big Ten and 21st nationally. Is that about where you think Nebraska can live under Matt Rule? Does Nebraska need to find a way to tick that up a couple notches if they want to challenge for the college football playoff moving forward?
This is a weird year. This is a super weird year. I think Matt was very conscientious of the 105 and really decided to go ahead and push back, on some guys and push back the idea of kind of opening it back up again. And I think that they didn't really understand what was going to happen with the portal and their own roster. And now, of course, we're seeing some stuff, and some guys I don't think that would have been like, people they would have had a conversation with to say it's never going to happen here. But, some guys that are walking away that you're just like going, I don't think they were anticipating that. Now you're looking for this guy. Now you're looking for this position. This is, I want to say, a really tough year to kind of take away a lot of data points from it. I'll be really interested to see maybe what happens next year, how they're going to manage the 105 and what other rules kind of come around it. But I think Nebraska is going to be very, very active in the portal, looking for offensive tackle help, looking for wide receiver help. I know they just got a good class of people rolling their eyes probably right now saying that Nebraska doesn't need more wide receivers. They need guys that can block. And I agree. I would absolutely agree. I think tackle and wide receiver are the big ones on the offensive side, outside shot on a running back, defensive line guys, probably even like a boundary corner or somebody else that can kind of move back and forth between some positions over there in the third level. So, no, I think you have to look at more of a combined look once you get the portal guys there and see what you get as far as your class is concerned.
That's Bryan Munson of Husker Online, our guest on our Allo Fiber VIP line. Bryan, as always, appreciate your time here at 3:30 on a Monday. Great local. Send people to Husker Online to check out some more. As always, appreciate your time, Bryan. Thanks, man.
Later, guys. See ya.